Happy Chodesh Elul, happy month of Elul. We're blowing the shofar. Tikah b'shofar gadol lecherutenu, blow on the great shofar for our freedom. We'll get to that in a second. But before we do that, I have to give an answer to the riddle that we discussed or talked about or threw out there as a riddle a few weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. Just for those that weren't here, to remind you, the riddle was, where in the Beit HaMikdash, where in the temple, was a mezuzah placed? For those that don't know, a mezuzah is placed on the side of the door, on the right side of the door, as you enter a house, to bring safety and security, that God should watch over you. As it says in the Shema, Uchtabtem al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha. You should write them, meaning these scrolls, put these scrolls on the side doorposts of your house and your gates. So, where in the temple were there mezuzot? And the answer to the question is, and by the way, thank you for all you trying. I saw a couple comments on the section below, in the comment section, and thank you for attempting to answer the question. And here is the answer. And it is actually, Maimonides brings it down, but it appears in the Gemara, in the Talmud of Yuma, in Masechet Yuma, is the Talmud that discusses Yom Kippur. Everything to do with the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, or on Yom Kippur, that is where it's explained. In fact, here is a Gemara from Mechon HaMikdash, from the Temple Institute, that they did. It's called Masechet Yuma. And it was with all the pictures and explanations of the Talmud on that particular tractate. So, the answer to your question is, it's in two places. One, it's on what's called Shar Niknor, the gate of Niknor, which is on the eastern side facing the altar, the Mizbeach. And I'll show you a picture of that from the Temple Institute. For those that can see and have good eyesight, you can see actually there's a mezuzah here on the Shar Niknor. That's one picture. And the other place was in Lishkat Palhedrin. Lishkat Palhedrin was the area where the Kohen Gadol, 7 days before Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol would go to this place. It was his place in the temple, and it was called Lishkat Palhedrin. It was a chamber of the Palhedrin. And that's actually on a picture. This is a picture of all of the Mikdash. And that's where the Lishkat Palhedrin would be. And on that Lishka, because he lived there for 7 days beforehand, getting ready, getting prepared for one of the toughest days of his life, and certainly for all of the Jewish people of the year. And he went here, and they would put a mezuzah on this door of the Lishkat Palhedrin. And that's what the Rambam, actually, Maimonides brings this down as halacha, as law. And he says, and the law is in Maimonides, the halachot of tefillin and mezuzah and sefer Torah. Makes sense. And it's in the 6th chapter and the 6th halacha. And he says like this, and you'll understand, because the verse in the Torah actually says that you write it al mezuzot beitecha, on the doorposts of your house. A house indicates a place where you live. And visharecha, also the gates that surround your house, whether it be your courtyards or the gates of the city. And that's what the Rambam says, Har HaBayit and the Lishkot and the chambers and the Azarot. Har HaBayit is the Temple Mount, and the Lishkot and the Azarot. The Azarot are the inner areas of the Beit HaMikdash. Ubate Knesset, and even shuls, synagogues. Ubate Midrashot, places of learning. She'en bahem Beit Dira, where no one's living there. Piturin lefi shehin kodesh. They don't need to put a mezuzah on them because they are holy on their own. They don't need that extra protection. And then here's where it says, Kol hasharim shahayu b'mikdash, all gates that were in the mikdash, in the temple, lo hayeh lahem mezuzot, they didn't have any mezuzot on them, chutz mishar niknor, except for Shar Niknor, which is that eastern gate facing the altar, v'shal lishkat parhedron, as well as the lishka of the parhedron, where the Kohen Gadol was, mimnei shal lishka azot, this particular chamber, haita beit dira, it was a living place, the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest, Bishivat Yemei Hafrasha, in the 7 days that he had to separate himself from the rest of the population and prepare himself for the holy day of Yom Kippur. So, and where's all this? This is all found, actually, in the tractate Yuma And if you were to purchase one of the Gemaras, one of these tractates of Talmud from the Temple Institute, you can learn a lot more about these issues. This is one of the ideas that actually opened my eyes too. Someone asked me that question a long time ago, and I had no answer. I was completely ignorant until I read from the Temple Institute the halachot, the laws that actually pertain to the mezuzah and the mikdash. Okay, now let's move on and get to the shofar. We're in the time of Elul. Elul is where we blow a shofar every day. After the prayers, we blow a shofar to awaken the soul. And a shofar, in many ways, is almost a cry. It sounds like a cry to a certain extent, the shofar. And the shofar represents many different aspects. It represents almost a wailing sound, a sound of fear, but it's also a sound of war. It's a sound of triumph. It has many different aspects to it. It also has a sound of rebellion. Blowing that shofar wakens us up to the call of rebellion to a certain extent. And we'll get to that in a second. At the same time, the sound of the shofar connects us to the Temple Mount. And you say, but what's it connecting to? And it's very important to understand is that the akeida Yiyzchak, Isaac, who was taken to the Temple Mount, as we discussed before, and there his father was commanded by God to bring him as an offering to God on that Temple Mount, on the place where the Mizbeach is, where the altar is meant to be today and was during these two temples. The one thing, when Yitzchak was not brought as an offering, Avraham found an ayal, a ram, and he took that ram and he brought that as an offering. And we take the shofar, because rams have actually shofrot on them, they have them, and we take that shofar and we blow it to bring about rachamim from God, to bring mercy from God, to awaken mercy from God, to remember, look what Avraham did. May the merit of Avraham help us and protect us. So when we blow that shofar, we're always connecting to the Temple Mount. And here's where I want to tell a story, an incredible story. I hope you will find it as chilling, as moving as I did when I heard it the first time. In 1929, pre-state Israel, the British were ruling, and there was a real massacre in Hebron in particular, and other places in Israel in general. But in particular, it was in Hebron. A lot of Jews were killed by the Arabs. There was an uprising, and many Jews killed Arabs, and they actually thought that they were all friends, and they took care of each other's kids at that time. And then one day there was an uprising, and they literally slaughtered Jews en masse. The next year, 1930, which was the following year after the massacre, the British decided to avoid any more confrontations, that anyone davening at the Kotel, any Jew who davened at the Kotel, or let's say any non-Muslim who wanted to pray at the Kotel, could not bring any Jewish paraphernalia, and that would include a shofar. They couldn't bring a Sefer Torah. They couldn't have an aron that would have the Sefer Torah in it. They couldn't bring anything. They couldn't even bring what was called a mechitza. Mechitza is a dividing wall between men and women when they pray. And Jews don't pray together. We pray separately. We put a separation between men and women. We don't have mixed pews, as they call it. So they were not allowed to bring anything. And this was because the British didn't want the Arabs to get angry and to start up with the Arabs. So they decided, let's pacify the Arabs and not allow any of these Jewish ceremonies, anything that Jews do, you can't do. You can only pray. There was a young guy, and his name was Moshe Tzvi Segel. And he was actually a Chabadnik. For those that I'm sure many of you know, Chabad. He was a Lubavitcher. And he was a young boy. And it really disturbed him that they wouldn't allow him to blow the shofar. And this is on Yom Kippur. So on Yom Kippur, we blow the shofar towards evening. And this young boy, when you're young, you're rebellious, right? You have that rebellious streak inside of you. And he said, I'm not going to let this pass. And he asked the rabbi of the Kotel, can I have the shofar? Where's the shofar? And the rabbi was very scared because he's an older man. He's concerned about the British, the Arabs, who knows what. He doesn't want to cause problems. But this young boy didn't care. And he says, where's the shofar? And the rabbi pointed to where the shofar was. And this young boy who became a rabbi, Rabbi Segel, he took out the shofar. And this is towards evening. on Yom Kippur, and he borrowed a talit from someone, the shawl. He put it over his head, and he blew that shofar with all he had. And immediately the British arrested him. They beat him, and they took him to jail. Luckily, there was a lot of pressure, and he was released. But he started a tradition, and that tradition kept going until Israel, until the Jews lost the old city to the Arabs, to the Jordanians actually. But it kept going every year. Someone would blow a shofar at Yom Kippur, and every year the British would look for this guy, they would catch him, and they would beat him, but they were relentless. They were determined to have this rallying call of rebellion. This is our place. You can't tell us what to do. This is our religion. You can't tell us what to do. And every year this happened. When Israel finally recaptured and liberated the Temple Mount and the Kotel next to it, the first Yom Kippur at the Kotel, everyone waited so that Rabbi Segel would be the first one to blow that shofar. And of course he did. And every year he blew a shofar, but Rabbi Segel was not happy with that. He wanted to blow shofar on the Temple Mount. And so what he did was, in 1980, he was able to find two young boys who were probably just as rebellious as he was when he was a kid. And they were able to sneak into the Temple Mount. At that point, Rabbi Segel was already quite old. And they were able to sneak into the Temple Mount. And they blew shofar on the Temple Mount for the first time in 1,700 years, if you can imagine, in 1980. Unfortunately, in 1986, Rabbi Segel passed away. But you can imagine, what day do you think was appropriate for Rabbi Segel to pass away on? And the answer was he passed away on Yom Kippur, the day he blew the shofar. How amazing, how incredible, how moving. So, for me, it tells me that the shofar is everything. The sound of the shofar, the kol pashut, the simple sound of the shofar, connects us directly to God on the Temple Mount. There's no words, just sound. Now, recently in Israel, 2 Jews were indicted. One for saying Shema Yisrael on the Temple Mount. And the second one was indicted for saying Kaddish, like the mourner's Kaddish that people would say. Both were indicted. We'll see what happens. But in my mind, this is a Chilul Hashem. It's a way of profaning God's name. How can a Jewish state run by Jews not allow someone to say Shema Yisrael or Kaddish on the Temple Mount, and not only that, but indict them and bring charges against them? It is a chutzpah, as they would say. It is a travesty of justice. Now, and I must admit, I've actually said Kaddish on the Temple Mount more than once. I actually said it during a riot that was happening on the Temple Mount. So I got away with it, I suppose. But there's another thing that's going on. A bunch of people who are Temple Mount activists have now also petitioned the government of Israel, the police in particular, to allow them to blow shofar on the Temple Mount. And this year is a special year for the Jewish people, because this year, the first day of Rosh HaShana, the first day of the new year, falls out on Shabbat. And on Shabbat, we don't blow shofar, except on the Temple Mount and possibly its surrounding areas of the closed area of Jerusalem. So they petitioned the police, let us go up to Har HaBayit on Shabbat so we can blow shofar, kihilchata, as it's meant to be, like the halacha dictates. Let me read you their answer. And I've actually translated their answer into English. And it goes like this. As you already know, any outright demonstration of acts of worship, including blowing the shofar, is currently not feasible on Har HaBayit. This is congruent with the arrangements that were established by the current ruling government, i.e., Bibi Netanyahu. I want to respond to this, and I want to respond with a quote by none other than Martin Luther King. And just so you should know, my father was a rabbi during the civil rights movement in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where the famous Chattanooga Choo-Choo is. And he got to meet Martin Luther King during that period of time. It was a heady time. It was a crazy time. But let me quote you Martin Luther King, because I think it says it all. And I will follow that with a quote by Maimonides that concurs with this idea. And you know, the Rambam says, accept the truth from wherever it is, or from whoever says it. So let's see what Martin Luther King had to say about this issue of blowing shofar on Har HaBayit, or praying on Har HaBayit, or saying anything, doing any sort of religious ceremony, Jewish religious ceremony on Har HaBayit. I will read this. It's short, so don't worry. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One is not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? And this is the key here. How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law or the law of God. To put in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. Well, I think that last line says it all. Jews going up to the Temple Mount, they are degraded on a daily basis. That would tell me that this is an unjust law. And Maimonides actually says that in the Laws of Kings, in the 3rd chapter. And he says like this, when it comes to God's laws and man's laws, God's always takes precedence. Divrei harav, v'divrei ha'eved, divrei harav kodmin. God's words always are the words of the servant, and the words of the master, the words of the master always take precedence. V'ein tzarech lomer, you don't even have to say this because it's so obvious. Im gazar hamelech, if the king, the ruling government, decrees, gazar hamelech levatel mitzvah, he decrees to abolish a commandment of God, to not allow you to do a mitzvah, she'en shomim lo, we don't listen to him. We don't listen to a king that tries to abolish laws, whether it be Brit Milah or whether it be being able to daven on the Temple Mount. And that's why I say to you, and I turn to everybody who's listening to this, both Jew and non-Jew, it doesn't matter. When you go up to the temple, you pray, because that's what God wants. It's good for prayer up there, as the Ramban says. You must pray up there. You pray, say Shema, say Kaddish, say whatever you need. If you have a shofar, blow it, because that's what you need to do. We cannot accept something for the sake of democracy, for the sake of God, who is our true moral compass, and for the sake of humanity, and simply put, for the sake of common sense. One is obligated to ignore the Israeli government's ban on prayer on the Temple Mount. Why? Because it is immoral, it is unethical, it is prejudiced, it is anti-Semitic, and plain unjust. And let us say the rallying cry that of King David, let us finish with the rallying cry of King David to his son Shlomo, when he told Shlomo regarding the temple. He told Shlomo, when you build the temple, do not be afraid, for God is with you. And let us say the words together, Chazak ve'ematz. Let's be strong and have courage, because that's what we need. Thank you.